Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Jay Myrax, and today I want to talk about hardware, and specifically, I want to talk about MPCs. I recently on my Instagram posted a video clip of me working on a beat using the MPC 2000XL, and one of my followers, either on Facebook or Instagram, they asked me this question about whether or not they should purchase an MPC 2000 for their own production because they wanted to tap into working the old school way. So I made this video because I want to just respond to this person and just help everybody that has similar questions, because I know this comes up a lot, this thing about whether you should tap into some of the old school equipment so that you can get the true sound, and whether you should get some of the classic equipment that some of the classic records that you may be familiar with were made on. So I'm just going to talk from my perspective. Some people out there may have different perspectives and different opinions on it. So I'm just going to answer the question by first prefacing a few things about the workflow that goes into using an MPC or any type of old hardware for that matter. So, one of the issues with using old hardware like the MPC 2000 or the 2000XL like I have is storage. That's a big thing, because storage is kind of what makes or breaks the whole experience for me. So, with the MPC, especially the MPC 2000XL, they came factory like stock with a floppy disk drive. So the floppy disk drive was 1.44 megabytes. So you really couldn't store that much data on it. You could store a few samples, and if you had a complex beat, then it would take quite a bit of your storage space on one floppy disk. So you may have had to use multiple floppy disks just to store a beat. Now later on, like with the 2000XL and the MPC 1000, the 4000, they started to incorporate different types of storage media. So for example, the MPC 2000XL MCD was a version of the MPC 2000XL that had a compact flash drive. So the compact flash drive allowed you to put in, up to about 2 gigabytes of storage media, so that you can store a lot of samples and your entire track on this storage media. So it made it a lot easier, because even after the floppy drives were like pretty much not the thing to do, we started using zip drives, and the zip drive connected via SCSI. So you had to buy SCSI cables, and you have to buy a SCSI drive. Then you had to buy the 100 megabyte zip disk. And that was a little bit better, but it does not compare to the whole compact flash and also the later storage mediums that the MPC started to incorporate, such as internal hard drives. So for me, using an old school MPC, you have to keep in mind that storage is a big issue. So if you're gonna get like an MPC 2000 or a 2000XL, you wanna make sure that it has some type of compact flash storage like the MCD, or some type of hot swappable card reader. Because another issue that came up later is that people started doing these aftermarket card readers, and they would install them into their MPCs. And I actually have one on my MPC 2000XL. I have like a aftermarket compact flash. And the problem with that is the aftermarket ones, many of them were not hot swappable. So what that means is, if I'm working on a track and say I'm like, man, I like the drums in here, but I want to get some more drums off of my computer and load in here, that means I have to turn this MPC completely off before I can remove the storage card, put it on my external card reader, and then load my sounds into my external card reader, dismount that from my computer, and then put it right back on my MPC and load it up and continue to work on my music. So that sounds like a pain, and which it is. That's not that comfortable of a workflow. So, for me, the way I get around that is I usually sample things from my computer directly into the MPC so that I don't have to do this whole switch the card out and turn the MPC off. I don't like to work like that. I like to just keep going. So I'll just sample directly from my outs 3 and 4 on my Apollo directly into the MPC, and just use the sampler, because the MPC is a sampler. So the great thing about it is you can sample directly into it. You don't have to transfer files. But I think that's one of the issues that come up, is that a lot of people want to transfer files back and forth, and depending on what MPC you have, it could be really inconvenient. So the best MPCs I would say to get if you're going to get an MPC and you're concerned about the storage would be the MPC 4000, because that has an internal hard drive standard. Then you have the MPC 1000 and the 2500s that have internal compact flash drives that are hot swappable, and they also have USB connectivity. So you can use the MPC 2500 and the 1000 as mass storage devices when connected via USB, so you can directly access them on your computer and take files, drag and drop files on and off of those particular devices. So it makes it a lot easier to transfer files. So the 5000 is another one that allows you to do similar things like that. But in general, I would say you want to stick to like the 4000, the 2500, and the 1000. The 2000XLs, if you're going to get one, you want to find the MCD version. Usually the MCD version is a blue MPC 2000XL, and it has like a black multi-card reader, and it's specifically called the MPC 2000XL MCD. So you want to look for one of those if you're going to get a 2000XL. Otherwise, you might be a little bit frustrated with storing and loading things on and off the MPC. So I would say another one of the issues that comes up is instant recall, or just recall in general. So when you save a beat, there's this issue of being able to pull up all the instruments and sounds that you used on your beat. So I use a Motif ES, and I have a couple other hardware instruments that I use via MIDI. And the issue is when I make a beat using sounds from those sources, the MPC by default doesn't save the state of any of the instruments unless I use particular features on either the hardware instruments I'm using, or I use the MPC to program in what's called bank change and program change. So this means if I'm using bank change, what I can do is go into my step sequencer on the MPC and input what's called program change, bank MSB, and bank LSB values. And those values will basically tell the MPC to send out data to each particular hardware instrument that I'm using, and it'll tell it which patch to pull up. So this can be helpful when you're working with the MPC, is to know the MIDI implementation for each of your hardware instruments you're going to have connected to it. So for me, in my workflow, I normally do send program change to some of my instruments, such as my analog synthesizers, because they don't have a lot of banks, but that I can send program change to select the individual sounds or patches. And on my Motif, I actually use the internal sequencer and the storage on the Motif to save the state of any of the sounds that I'm using, because the Motif also has a sequencer, so it allows you to save patterns. And I save every track that I make in sequence on the MPC as a pattern also on the Motif. But the pattern on the Motif is just empty, but it saves the state of my mix as well as the state of the patches that I'm using. So that's the way I manage my recall. And for some people, you don't have the ability to do that depending on what instrument you're using. So you have to develop a better recall system. So one thing that I recommend is, if you're going to use an MPC, you need to be very conscientious about naming your tracks on the MPC. So every time you have a track, and you've basically completed the whole arrangement or song, when you're saving, what you want to do is name each track according to whatever patch name you used in each particular hardware instrument that you have connected to it. So that way you can easily access or pull up the sounds again if you need to recall things, because you can see the track name, and the track name corresponds to either the preset name or just the patch number in your particular hardware device. So that's one way to manage it. Another way to manage it is to just have a notebook or some notes in your phone for each beat that tell you what the state was of each instrument that you may be using. So you can just say, okay, track number 1 was the piano and the motif, and it was at 110 volume. So that way you have a way of recalling things when you want to pull up the beat again and continue working on it. So those are some of the things that I would say are major considerations about using a hardware instrument like the MPC. Another major one I would say is the fact that you have to track out everything. So on the MPC 2000XL, I normally track out individual tracks one track at a time. And it's not because I don't have a proper interface, it's just that's the workflow that I use, because I like to be able to monitor individual sounds and just hear each individual sound as I'm recording, and I like it better to just track out individual. But if you have a multi-channel audio interface such as the Apollo or some other 8-channel or more input interface, then you can track multiple sounds from your hardware at one time. I'm only running digital out of my MPC, so that's another reason why I track one instrument at a time. If I was running out of my 8 outputs, then I would track multiple instruments. But the thing is, since I don't have 16 inputs on my interface, it just makes more sense for me to go out digitally. So I just go out of my MPC using my digital outputs, and the digital output is stereo, so that really is going to confine me to using 2 tracks or a stereo pair at a time. So that's another thing to consider, because if you're using a lot of tracks in your arrangement, you're going to have to do multiple passes, and you're going to have to synchronize your MPC using MIDI or some type of time code such as SMPTE. So that's another reason that people get a little bit discouraged about using hardware, is because they have to go through this process of tracking out things manually. It's not an automatic thing where you can export. So you have to be ready to work at the end of the day. An MPC or any type of hardware instrument is going to require more work as far as transferring your music to your computer or your whatever you're recording to. It's going to take you some work, and it's going to take time, and you have to be okay with the amount of time that it takes to work on that type of device. Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated, and you're going to just say this is nonsense. And I know a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people feel like it's nonsense, it's a waste of their time. I personally am okay with recording. I like recording because I like being able to get different tones out of sounds, and I just like the process overall. So for me, it's not a big deal, but for some people that need to be able to work quickly, it's a problem. And I would say that if you need to be able to work quickly, the computer is still the best bet. And I would say if you still want that MPC feel, get something like the MPC Renaissance, where you have this whole MPC workflow, but then you can use the computer for export, and it makes it a lot easier to search your files and be able to incorporate other samples that may be on your hard drive without using media such as the compact flash or even USB for that matter. So hopefully this answers the question that my partner had on Facebook, and just any of you out there that are interested in working with an MPC or like an old school hardware device, hopefully this gives you some more insight on some of the challenges that you may face, and some of the things to consider as you are looking to expand the things that you work with in the studio. Because I use a lot of old school equipment as well as new school equipment, and I just know that there are things that come up that could really stun your workflow. But as far as just having a good workflow is concerned, it's about having a well thought out and well put together studio so that you can do all the things that you want to do efficiently. So we have to be thoughtful about the purchases we make, and we have to really consider how we need to be able to work before we start buying things in our studio. So hopefully this tip helps you. And till next time, I want to just tell y'all peace and God bless. Remember to subscribe and share this video if this video is helpful to you. Like it and just comment if you have any questions or other feedback for me. All right, thanks again and peace.